All right, everyone, what's going on? Apologize for being a little bit late. So, welcome to a value conversation, Gen X spoken word. So, what are we going to discuss tonight? Well, tonight's topic is going to be Black conservative misinformation to the masses. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and pull this up. There we go. And let's bring up the slide. All right. So, as it stands here, there has been a fair amount of misinformation that we've seen going around here for about a year, even longer, per se. Now, I've only gotten involved in the space, let's say, in the last 2 years or so. So, a lot of the information that I was seeing that was being misspoke on was already passing around for a little while. One of the main things that I'm going to have a conversation about here is a video that I saw Dennis Sperling do. It's probably about 3 or 4 days ago, somewhere within that time frame, where he was giving his general assessment of the Democratic Party as it stands right now and considering them to be crash test dummies. So while I'm listening to him misrepresent some facts, I don't know if he did it on purpose or maybe he wasn't too clear about it, but there was a lot of rhetoric that I was hearing. So it made me think, how often do other Black content creators misrepresent or flat out lie about information? So I thought about a few other folks here. So if you take a look at the slide, you can see who I've got pegged here. And these are some notables that we've seen spreading some information, that being misinformation, for a while now. The first one being Representative Byron Donalds from the Republican Party. Now, I don't know who remembers, but if not, I've put the captions here that I'm speaking of directly. Now, of course, Byron Donalds and Candace Owens are not going to be the topics of tonight here, but I just want to make it known, fair use, that there is misinformation or misrepresentation of information that has come from all three of them. So, with Byron Donalds, he spoke that Black families were together under Jim Crow. Of course, where else are they going to live? But all jokes aside here, yes, the Black family was together, but the way that he presents it, it's about context and it's misleading because when you look at it as a whole, Blacks did not live well, did not prosper well under Jim Crow or under segregation, under racial discrimination. So to say that, oh, well, they were stronger, the marriage rates were higher. Okay, yes, that may be true. No one's going to deny that because again, Blacks were only allowed to marry Blacks at the time until there was some legislation passed. But still, at that point in time, that does not mean that we lived good as Blacks under Jim Crow. That just meant that within our communities, as we stayed together, yes, we did fine in that respect. But what about the overall aspect of life itself? What was that? Miserable and horrible. But again, that's why I put under him the statement of being misleading. Next, we have Candace Owens. Now, of course, through the presidential race last year, somehow the narrative got started that Kamala Harris wasn't Black. All right, so that is just flat out and demonstrably false. To add to that, I published a video not too long ago under the title, Yes, Kamala Harris is Black. And I provided all the information substantiating her lineage. So, for those of you who are not familiar with this, Kamala Harris was stated as being, well, she's not Black. I think she's Indian, but I'm not really sure. Did she just start becoming Black? Did she just become Black all of a sudden? These are the words of Donald Trump. Now, not verbatim per se, but he mostly insinuated that she had never once considered herself to be Black, which I proved was also a lie. So in the end, getting back to it, when Candace Owens started making videos talking about, oh, she's not Black, this woman who's in this picture with her is not actually her grandmother. This is a paid actor. Her grandmother died 4 years before she was born. Candace got it all wrong, didn't even research it properly. So I won't go any further into that. I'll just simply make the statement right now. It was a damn lie. And now, the topic of today's discussion is Sperling. This was one of many false or misleading claims that Dennis made. This one being that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. Now, I scoured the internet like most folks would have done, and sure, you're going to find some billboards that someone would have put up saying, oh, he was a Republican. You may even find some articles saying that, oh, yeah, he was a registered Republican. But there's nothing that I could find, not saying that if it's out there, somebody find it. But overall, there was nothing anywhere stating that Martin Luther King was ever a Republican. Now, fact, prior to 1965, before there was the change in ideology, yes, this actually did happen. That was something else that Dennis refuted. Prior to 1965, the last remnants of the Democrat and Republican Party were seen. What were the two issues that finally made the switch in party ideology? The 1964 passing of the Civil Rights Act, along with 1965, where they passed the Voting Rights Act. Now, for the Democrats who had inside of their party still from age of old, we're talking about going back 100 years, you had the Dixecrats, who were internally a fringe party that was still part of the Southern Democrats, who again were primarily against integration of schools, integration of the military, and basically civil rights for blacks. Now, by this time in 1965, after those two acts occurred, the exodus had already been taking place over about 10 years or so. So the majority of the last of the Southern Democrats and Dixiecrats had jumped ship, with maybe a few stragglers still hanging in there for an additional 10 or 15 years, thinking that there was still a way to go back with the Republican Party, or excuse me, go back to the issues that the Democratic Party was known for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, if you take a look here at the corners, you can see some of the lies that were told, misleading statements, misrepresentation, call it what you like, but it is not true. So a statement made, Jasmine Crockett is unpatriotic. Okay, that is a lie. Now, obviously, this is going to depend upon what your party affiliation is. Democrats, Republicans never switch ideologies. Oh, yeah, that is a flat out lie. Democrats formed the KKK. There's another lie. And finally, KKK was Democrat military wing. No, they were not. So, what I'm saying here, folks, is that it's amazing what people will believe if you don't have anyone actually come out and make a statement to go against that. And that's something that I've seen here readily in the space that I've seen for, again, the last couple of years or so. You can literally sit down and have a conversation with someone, provide the information in front of them, and instead of accepting it, they'll say, well, those facts are wrong. But after that statement of the facts being wrong is made, nobody actually contends and proves why they're wrong. No, nothing is seen. Just a moment. Need to make an adjustment here. All right, so I apologize if the sound was off. I just realized. Here we go. I need to set my speaker back. Let me do one more thing. All right. Hey, sorry guys. Just got over here to bringing up the chat. Dude, what's going on, man? Appreciate you for stopping in. Always good to have people come by. Oh, by the way, shout out, thanks, Fatty, if you got anyone coming this way. As always, man, greatly appreciated for the assistance. Oh, you heard every word? Okay, good. Appreciate it. I wasn't sure if there was an echo or if I missed anything. So again, dude, thanks, man, for checking in. All right. So moving on here, as I said here, one of the biggest things that I think people have a tendency to forget here is that facts don't choose sides. All right, it just doesn't work that way. A second thing to think about is facts are not afraid of the truth. So therefore, how do you have a good conversation with someone if they are not coming to you in good faith? You can't. As of right now, you literally have in America where people can look at the absolute truth of the fact, but depending upon who they've been listening to, who has allowed them to be subverted from the truth, you're not going to be able to make any headway. The conversation is just not going to work. So if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody about, I think I've mentioned this before, hey, that car gets good gas mileage. And someone says back to me, you know what? I think it does, but I think this car gets better gas mileage. Not that the gas mileage on this is bad. What we can agree on is that we both know that we're talking about a car. But if I'm talking about, hey, this car gets good gas mileage, somebody else says, you know what? I don't really care because this truck does such and such. Matter of fact, is this even a vehicle that you're talking about? Is this even a car? Matter of fact, who made it? I don't think this is an actual car. When you start having those conversations, you're losing grip with reality. And that's one of the things about fact that is getting really, I can't think of a better word, that is becoming shocking, scary, name it what you want. You literally cannot convince folks of what is true if they believe otherwise and won't allow themselves to see different. Hey, Jason, what's going on, man? Appreciate you checking in also. All right, so enough of my ranting. So what I want to do is go ahead and jump into the video that I caught here with, let me set this up. Yeah, that I caught here with Dennis Sperling. So as I said before, Dennis got on a mile-long hike about some things that I literally thought, okay, I can't let this fly. I just can't sit here and listen to this guy throw these lines out here. There is no truth in this. But again, he's got a lot of followers. He's been associated with a lot of folks inside of social media. So therefore, because of the fact he's got affiliations, it becomes a thing of, well, he's got 75,000 subscribers. Somebody else has 100,000. Somebody may have 800,000. So obviously what's being said must be true. No, what's being said might be popular, but it doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that there's enough charisma or not just charisma, but there's enough folks who believe it, who will accept it as truth, but not challenge it because others are saying and thinking the same thing. Hence, that's why I started doing the fact checking, if some of you have been able to catch the videos. Now, I did not come into this space to be a fact checker. However, I am big on accuracy. So therefore, if accuracy is not there, then we have a problem trying to have the communication, all right? Enough said. Fair use, fair use. Oh, by the way, again, if you take a look in the description, I've left the information as far as the timestamps of where Dennis just got on a roll and just started talking absolute madness. All right. But again, there's too much to go through. So that's why I left you the timestamps in the event that anyone wants to go through the video on their own and have a look at it. Now, what I've got here is just some things that, again, I found to be particularly egregious that I want to go ahead and have a discussion about. Yeah, fair use, fair use.
Okay, I need to say this, black folk, you are not sacrificial lambs for the Democratic Party. Okay, you are not cannon fodder. They push us to the front lines. They abuse us, they use us, then they discard us, they leave us to rot once our usefulness has expired. They prop us up when it's convenient. When they need a face to sell their latest agenda. But the second our value diminishes, they toss us aside without a second thought. How many times do we need to see this play out before we wake up? Just look at the disgraceful spectacle of Al Green.
All right, so that's just a little bit that he goes off on. Now, one of the things that Dennis did was he found instances where he was able to say, or that allowed him to put his narrative out, basically stating, okay, look at the poor behavior of the Democrats. Just look at what they're doing. How can anyone follow a party like this who lacks any decorum? Oh yeah. he actually stated this. Now, he didn't waste any time going about it, pointing out examples. Like I said, there's way too many that that I can't pick up on. But what I'll do here, let me give you one for right here. All right, so if anyone is checking out the descriptions, if you look at 1 hour and 34 minutes, this is where Dennis was criticizing Al Green. Now, he's just making comments right now about said actions of Senator Green. But he was stating that, oh, look at this poor behavior. Now, just look at how the Democrats are. Just look at how they're conducting themselves. Now, as I was looking at this and watching him make those statements, the first thing I thought about was the uproar that we saw that occurred when you had Boebert and Green interrupting Joe Biden. Now, prior to that same the State of the Union address, I can't recall anywhere other than, let's say, back when Obama's and there was someone jumped up and said lie, but I think that may have been during a press conference. I don't think that was State of the Union. I think that was a press conference. But when have you ever seen anyone stand up and interrupt the State of the Union? MTG and Boebert were the first folks I ever saw that. I mean, literally get up and show their entire ass, pardon my language, but just get up there and be disruptive. So, of course, Senator Al Green got up and said his part. Was it disruptive? Yes. Was it out of the norm for decorum? Yes, it was. Was it needed? No, it's going to vary depending on who you talk to. But again, what I found was it was hypocritical of Dennis to criticize Green when just the following year, two of the folks in this party that he now affiliates with conducted themselves in the same manner. Call it what it is, hypocrisy. All right, like I said, I've got a whole lot of information. I mean, this just ripped draws when I saw this. Like, you guys have got to be kidding me. You are really going to try this, Dennis. You are actually going to put this out on the street. All right, well, if you're going to do that, then somebody needs to go ahead and bounce it back. So I guess I'll be that person. All right, so let's start at the beginning. The Great Switch, how the Republican and Democratic parties flipped ideologies. So as you guys know here, at least who is either here live or those of you who might be watching in the replay, the Democratic Party, I mean, what's the best way to put it? The Democratic Party used to be absolutely diabolical. I mean, this party was all about segregation, about Southern rights, and basically the subjugation of Black people. Before we get to the article, let me just go ahead and lay the baseline here. So the baseline that was being laid throughout the video, which is about 3 hours or so, if you guys take a look at that, from Dennis Sperling, is that the Democratic Party of old, so rather than we talk about the Whig Party and going back from 1865 to 1820, 77, no, we're not going to do that because we pretty much know what the history is. What separates, or should I say what is specific right now, is going to be from 1865 up till today, with a stop off in 1965, which is where we actually saw a lot of the change that took place that put us where we are right now with our political parties. So back in the 1800s, we'll say at 1865, we know the main reason for the Civil War was over slavery. All right. The Democrats in the South were hardcore for segregation. All right. So therefore, you had who was known in the Democrat Party as the Southern Democrats. And the Southern Democrats were pro-slavery. Now, when people say that the Republican Party was the party of the working man's party, everyone's party or every man's party, the party that freed the slaves, the party that was for slave rights, yes, that was the case. This was how it was back in 1865, leading up till 1965. So we had the pro-Black Republican Party and the anti-Black Democrat Party. So that is absolute fact. That is truth. Now, what is also truth is that is the way that today's Republicans still try to portray the Republican Party as being, as well as the Democrat Party being. There's no truth in that today. But that's where a lot of Dennis's speculation and, or should I say, speculatory talk circled around. He was making direct comparisons from the 1800s and early 1900s Democratic Party, a beeline from there directly to 2025. Now, he just skipped over a whole switch in how parties viewed issues and how things had swapped. He just did a straight beeline from 1865 to 2025. Now, ideally, that's what I want to contest. So it even starts out and states here the Democratic and Republican parties have not always had the same ideals that they have today. In fact, America's two dominant political parties have essentially flipped ideologies in the time since they were founded. So if you're picking up what I'm putting down, for anyone who's still live in the chat, I know there's just two of us right now, but go ahead and put a one in the chat if you're hearing what I'm saying here. I'll say it one more time. In fact, America's two dominant political parties have essentially flipped ideologies in the time since they were founded. Put a one in the chat if you heard me say flipped ideologies, because that is something, again, that Dennis Sperling contested and said, no, no one has flipped ideologies. That Democratic Party is still the same party as it was before. The Democratic Party was founded in 1828, while the Republican Party dates back to 1854. In the early years, the Republican Party was considered quite liberal, while the Democrats were known for staunch conservatism. This is the exact opposite of how each party would be described today. So that is the basis of what laid everything out right now. Yeah, Dinner Dude, you're right, man. That is all facts. Now, this is something that you will not find any staunch, diehard, oh no, paying taxes unconstitutional, conservative supporter to agree to. They're just not going to hear it. Now, granted, this is just one of many sites here. Ideally, when I do go hardcore on my stuff, I make sure that I use a mixture of three sites that I've shared with everybody. That would be Media Bias Fact Check, All Sides Media Bias, as well as Ad Fontaine Media Bias. A new site that I use that looks at all three of those sites in tandem is called Ground News, or ground.news. And what ground.news does, it will look at those three basic fact checkers and then do the comparison on whether or not they are center based, left leaning a little, left right leaning a little bit, or should I say lean left, lean right, or far left and far right. But this is something that allow you gauge who you get your sources from. We're talking like Reuters, BBC, AP News, to name a few, on, let's say, as far as center based. And then you go off to your left side where you may have your MSNBC, your CNN, your Guardian. And on the right, you'll have Fox, Newsmax, OAN, Red State. But the best thing about these sources that I've mentioned here is that you can take the information that you get from those news sources and you can see whether or not there is a level of credibility to where you're getting your information from. So again, I fact check everything that I do before I speak, but my hope here is that by sharing this with everyone, you guys do the exact same thing. All right, so moving into this here, so we can see that there's the ideology that talks about where each party was in the past and how they stood as far as slavery went. So the Republicans were the abolitionists that were against slavery. And of course, they were the Democrats, again, who were pro-slavery. And again, they were slave owners. Now, don't get it twisted. You had slave owners who were in the North also. But the slave owners in the North, the majority will say, rather than a minority, but the majority were beginning to get a seed planted in their minds that these Negroes, as we were called, are humans and deserved of respect and of a life as well. So that seed started 100 years before we got to the votes of 1964 and 1965. Now, as you know, after the Civil War, you had a period of Reconstruction that began. But during that time, once blacks were freed, there was an issue to whereas you still had a lot of Southerners who did not like the idea of blacks having the level of freedom that whites did. All right, so tell you what, before we go any further, let's do this. Like I said, I've just got a gang of information. I am giddy about what I can present here. So I'm going to try and keep this in a steady narrative. So I may go back and forth between articles because there are points in time that intersect. So you can actually go ahead and do a cross connect where you can look at one particular point of time where there was an action or an act that took place. And you can also see in another article where everything intersects. All right. So we've got a cross correlation of information that we can go to. Now, you heard me mention with the Republican Party. All right. So the biggest thing to think about here is the Republican Party here. Is that, again, they were all about providing for the slaves. They want the slaves to be free. They want them to have rights like everyone else. They were abolitionists. They were pro for the slaves. All right. They were anti-slavery. And that is one of the things that makes the Republican Party who they are not nowadays. Because when you speak of the current Republican Party, they still like to view themselves as the Republican Party that freed the slaves. If you have a conversation, oh, yes, it was the Republican Party that freed the slaves. We're the ones who ensured that the Emancipation Proclamation was pushed through by Lincoln. We are the party of Lincoln. Why would you ever vote Democrat? Again, there's that critical part that is left out. So you had a voting bloc that soon emerged that was considered or called the Solid South to do this. And the Solid South was made up. Now, it doesn't go too much into it here. You'd have to click on the link, but we're not going to do that. I don't want to take us far down the rabbit hole here. But the Solid South was pretty much made up of those southern those southern states that truly did not want to see the loss of slavery. I mean, it just was not going to happen. Now, the idea here that I wanted for this particular tab here is to give you an idea of where things were come 1964. But let's not do that just yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Instead, let's have a conversation about the Dixecrats. Now, the Dixecrats came to be right around the time that Truman was integrating the military. But before the Dixecrats, like I said, I've got just a plethora of information here. There we go. Before the Dixiecrats themselves were formed, you had the Southern Democrats. Now, as I said before, the Southern Democrats were slave owners. And being slave owners, they did not want to let loose of their slaves. There was just no way that these guys were looking at giving that away. It just wasn't going to happen. And because of that, of course, we had the Civil War. But after the Civil War, when all the slaves were finally freed, as I was saying before, you still had a lot of the Democrats or the Confederate sympathizers who had an issue with blacks having the same rights, being able to start working openly next to the white man, as they put it. And that was a definite no-no. So as a result of that, what you ended up having were bands of former Confederate soldiers who started attacking, maiming, killing, raping, and burning down the houses, and even lynching blacks. Matter of fact, let's do this also. So again, this is where we have the entrance of the Ku Klux Klan. Let me see if I can find article. Now, as I said before, Dennis Sperling made the statement that the Ku Klux Klan was the military wing of the Democratic Party, and also that the Ku Klux Klan was the Ku Klux Klan was founded by the Democrat Party. None of that was true. Now, how do I know this? Well, because of the fact that I'm from Tennessee. And back in 1982, if you were in seventh grade, the book they gave you was called Our Tennessee. And in that book, Our Tennessee, you learned that the Ku Klux Klan was founded and created by Confederate soldiers in Pulaski, Tennessee. Let me bring up something from Politizoo, which again is another fact-checking based website. Let's just go with PolitiFact. PolitiFact. And formed by Democrat. It even sounds silly just to hear yourself say it. All right, so now let's go ahead and head back over to the screen here. So if you can see here, I've typed in PolitiFact, which is again is a fact-checking website. PolitiFact and could have been a plus sign if you're into Boolean operators. PolitiFact and Ku Klux Klan was formed by the Democrat Party. No, the Democratic Party didn't create the Ku Klux Klan. You can't be any clearer than that. But even in the last year, last 2 or 3 years, you can still hear people. I think Ted Cruz even tried to say that the Ku Klux Klan was formed by the Democrat Party. Absolutely not. Again, you guys can see for yourselves. But you can go down the page here, and you can see where it states Democrat Party did not found the KKK. Ku Klux Klan not founded by Democratic Party. I mean, you can just keep going through here and just click on it, and you'll see more information stating that it is further from the truth, not a fact. But since we're here, let's go ahead and just open this up. So here is the statement again. Somebody tried this back in October 2017. And we have ads again. The KKK was formed by the Democratic Party. And over here, you can see where it says false. And then it goes into a little information of who was telling this lie back then. You saw that Donald Trump and a whole bunch of white nationalists were trying to use this cadence. Oh yeah, the Ku Klux Klan founded, or the Democratic Party founded the Ku Klux Klan. And others, again, as I said before, the same thing that Dennis Sperling has stated. Yeah, the Ku Klux Klan was the military wing of the Democratic Party. Back in 2013, Virginia State Senator Stephen Martin also claimed that the KKK was created by Democrats. See how easy it was for people to tell this lie, but the information was right here. But again, if you don't fact check, you're not going to see it. So therefore, the rhetoric gets passed from one generation, one House, one Senate to the other. The Republican lawmakers soon retracted the statement after PolitiFact Virginia started to investigate the origins of the KKK. Now, as you go through here, again, this article is put together mainly just to make sure that people who are short on time, meaning short on attention span, could come here and verify this information if they did not want to accept what was being told to them. Now, as I said before, the whole idea of mixing the KKK of then with the Democratic Party of now, as well as trying to say that the Democrats founded it, just goes to serve a narrative. And that narrative is that as Republicans to this date, we are still the party of Lincoln. Not true. Although the name stayed the same, the platforms of the two parties reversed each other in the mid 20th century, due in large part to the white Dixecrats fight out of the Democratic Party and into the Republican Party after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this is something that an historian or a fact checker stated. So put a one in the chat if you are understanding that, again, the ideologies of the party changed. More than that, let me give you the exact timestamp that Dennis Sperling said different. All right, at 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 45 seconds. Again, this information I've made available to everyone inside of the description. So again, there you go. Again, if you go down to the description, again, at 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 45 seconds, you can see where Dennis claims the Democratic Party was the party of the KKK. Yeah. Now, prior to that, at 2 hours and 3 minutes, all right, so you have Dennis talking about the ideologies of the Democratic Party. And as I've said before, he completely skips over what the Democratic Party was back then as compared to who they are right now. Same thing with the Republicans. But again, I always come bearing proof, do I not? I'm not going to lie to you folks. If I get it wrong, I will correct it. But ideally, when I say it the first time, I mean what I say. Now, as I said before, the Democratic Party of old, these cats were absolute trash. All right. We as Democrats were diabolical, to say the least. Back in the mid 19th century, various clans in the South acted as a strong arm for many local Democratic politicians. The Confederate general, believed to be the KKK's first grand dragon, even spoke at the 1868 Democratic National Convention. By the time the Civil Rights Act became law, the Democratic Party supported so called liberal causes that had been the banner of the Republican Party. Now, here's where we're talking about the disconnect from 1868, and this passage here is referring to 1964. While some Democrats supported the KKK, there's no evidence the group was founded by their political party. And context matters. The anti Black Democratic Party of yore, meaning yesteryear, is not the party that Hillary Clinton belongs to today. And again, this PolitiFact here is from 2017. Overall, we rate this statement false, and false is how it will stay. So, anybody have any questions in the chat before I go any further? Are we in agreement that the KKK was not founded by the Democratic Party, nor was a military wing of the Democratic Party? Can we agree on that? Drop a one in the chat if you believe that we can agree on that as a yes, or put a two in there if you want to say no. Stand by here for a second. Show me what you got. All right. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We know that this is a lie. So, as I said before, all you have to do is simply go back a quick search and you can get the truth. Now, I will say this, the algorithm works as such. If all you want to see is puppies, then puppies is all you will see. However, if you happen to go outside your comfort zone, choose a different topic, once is enough, it will flood the zone with that. But again, facts do not choose sides. What I will start doing more often here, I need to go ahead and make sure that I put the fact checking links as part of the description so it's always readily available. But if not, you can go back and take a look at, I think I called it fact checks for everyday people. If you go back to that one, you're going to find all the necessary links here. And with those links, if you were to watch anything that Dennis Sperling does, or anybody else, Candace Owens for that matter, you will be able to find mistruth in the words being spoken. Because again, I have no doubt here that this level of misinformation is taken as fact with it. All right. Again, check the description, take a look, and see what you find. All right. So getting off of that, we don't need to save this tab. So we'll just go ahead and drop that down. And we'll go back over. Actually, we'll go back to our main article. All right. So basically, here I've hopefully set the groundwork. So as of right now, we can agree here that the previous iteration, or the Republican Party of yesteryear, was pro civil rights, or anti-slavery. All right, they were abolitionists. These are the people that fought for the rights of slaves. But also understand that with the Ku Klux Klan working in tandem with the Democratic Party, again, the belief of the Democrat Party and the Ku Klux Klan were aligned. These folks, although they worked hand in hand, one was not directed by the other. They both shared the same interests. They had similar interests, which was making sure that Black folks did not survive or get out of line and knew what their place was. You know what? Let's go ahead and step back on that a little bit more, because there's a history of how things went down after the Civil War. Now, again, Blacks were able to, in some small fashion, maybe own a little bit of land that they farmed. Some Blacks even went back to work for their former masters after the Civil War, depending on where they were, because they were destitute for jobs. But in certain areas, Blacks were actually coming together, thriving, and making their own communities. Now, as I said before, you had a lot of activity from the Confederate soldiers um, who were joining the Klan. And what were some of the things that some of us, if you're old enough to remember, I was again born in 1970. So at that point in time, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was still fresh, right? It was still fresh, but it was to the point that I still remember as a child hearing my grandparents talk about, oh, I hope this doesn't bring the Klan around, or hey, so and so said that the Klan was in such an area. Now, of course, I have never in my life seen the Klan in the area where I lived. But I remember my grandparents having conversation with folks who had actually had run-ins with the Klan, who had seen houses burned by the Klan. You know, this is just conversations that I can just barely remember. But there was a lot of Klan talk when I was born and throughout the 70s and up to the mid 80s. Now, if you don't know this, all you have to do is look up the Ku Klux Klan, look up anything online that talks about burning crosses, Klan going into Black people's houses, dragging them out, beating them, whipping them. And of course, there was lynchings. Now, this is all stuff that went on throughout the South predominantly. Poppy, what's going on, man? So you had a whole issue, all right? Hey, doing good, Poppy. So you had a whole issue of Blacks living in fear because of this. Now, keep in mind now, Byron Donald stated that, oh, well, the Black family was strong together and united together under Jim Crow. Now, the Black family was strong amongst themselves, but this Black family and all the others lived in fear of what was going on, primarily because of the Ku Klux Klan out here running wild. So wild to the point that around 1870 and 1871, they had the Klan Acts. They actually had to put law in place to prosecute the Ku Klux Klan because of them terrorizing the former slaves. Now, if you look that up, I want to say it was called the Klan Acts of 1870 1871. But ideally, you had prosecution of the Klan. And this was done primarily from the Republican side of the country, where they were going into areas and actually prosecuting and getting jail time for some of the Klan members. Now, as always, the higher ones up, like the Grand Wizards, they weren't able to get the Grand Wizards, but all the folks below that, you could get convictions for them. But at a certain point in time, because the Democratic states were so in control by the Democratic Party, you had a lot of people who actually got away and were not prosecuted. But the act did slow down a lot of the lawlessness that was going on here. Now, one aspect I can speak of, and you can do your research here, Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, the big thing about Wilmington, North Carolina, if no one knows about that, is that this was a time where you had found tranquility, you had found balance, where you had blacks and whites who were actually governing together. Now, is anyone else here familiar with the topic of Wilmington, North Carolina? So if not, let's just go ahead and just take a quick dive in this. Now, this was not something I was planning on speaking about, but it's all relevant if you look at how much control the Democratic Party had back in the latter part of the 1800s and going into the 1900s, where they started losing control because of the fact, again, that civil rights for blacks was becoming more and more prominent. So essentially, you had the remnants again of the Ku Klux Klan, or people who didn't bother putting on sheets, who literally took over the town, who literally went in, told anyone, black and white, who worked in the town that you need to be gone at such a time, or we're going to kill you. And just like that, there was still a mauling for the most part. You had numerous deaths, to whereas you had pro-segregation Democratic Party members, or just whites from that area, who came in and took over an entire democratically run town. That entire town was pretty much expunged of anyone, black or white, who was for allowing slavery or former slaves to have some type of position in that town. That town went from being a town that was under, let's say, Republican, I won't say Republican rule, but Republican values that valued the slave, to going right back into control of the Democratic Party, or at least folks who support the Democratic Party. So you had a duly elected uh, government, or in that town, you had a duly elected system that was wiped out to what can be called an insurrection. And that town, to this day, right now, to this moment, that particular area is still running and voting and actively a part of that town, the states, all of the agenda of the legislature based upon that insurrection. Hey, if you don't believe me, look it up. Wilmington, North Carolina. So that insurrection was the first one. Of course, we know the second one was January 6, 2021. But if you have this conversation, nobody speaks of it. Hell, I didn't even know about it myself until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. But these are some things that are not taught in the history books. There are stories, and you can find this, of towns where there were thriving black populations that, for one reason or another, all of a sudden ended up underwater, and now it's become a lake. And you can still find remnants of those black cities if you dive to the bottom of certain lakes, to where you can actually see where there was a population. You see maybe stores, or you just see old monuments from this town itself. But there's a lot of the American history that is not told and that people do not know about. But nonetheless, getting back on track, the Ku Klux Klan was allowed to terrorize blacks for almost 25 or 30 years. And going up, we'll say, let's not stop at 30 years. We're talking about from 1865 up until 1965. Klan was just out of control. Now, we saw them losing steam going throughout the late 80s and then towards the early 90s. But you know what we'll do? I'll go back and get information, and we'll do a show where we'll look specifically at the Ku Klux Klan, and we'll get a little bit more in depth here, because I don't want to get too far off the topic, but I just want to make sure that I'm sharing as much as I can with everybody, just to keep everything interesting. So let me know if I'm keeping things interesting. All right. Okay, so I think I've done more than enough to pretty much lay it out to where things were at the time when the economy crashed in 1929. Now, as it says here, when the economy crashed in 1929, the Republican president, Herbert Hoover, opted not to intervene, earning him and his party the ire of the American public. Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat, sensed the need for change. So here's where we're going to start seeing where the concept of let's try and take care of everyone. Let's look at welfare for all Americans. This is where things started, where that seed was planted in the Democrat Party, it aided the shift that we're going to see in about 10, 15 years. He campaigned on a promise of government intervention, financial assistance, and concern for the welfare of the people. He won the 1932 election by a landslide. It was FDR's campaign policies that caused a major shift in the party ideologies. Now, once again, do you see where we are seeing continual, continual references to a shift in the party ideologies? I think we've been through a couple of documents already, and I've stated this many times that there was a shift. Dennis Sperling, again, said that there was no shift. He said there was no shift. All right. But a few documents, we've already seen that, yes, there was. Don't you love facts? Republicans oppose everything about FDR's government. Now, again, this Republican Party that we're speaking of, let me make sure I bring this back on the screen for everybody. This Republican Party is still the party of Lincoln, or at least is starting to die out. But remember, they are fiscal hawks. So even though they were for the slavery, for civil rights, there was still an issue of money that these guys still looked at. Again, Republicans opposed everything about FDR's government. Primarily, they saw the growth of large government as harmful to the Federalist foundation of the nation. This too has come to define the ideals of the Republican Party. All right, so this is where things start getting interesting. But before we do that, I don't think I provided this information, but let me just go ahead and take a time out and fill in the gap here again. Carl, what's good, man? Appreciate you dropping by. Much thanks as always. Like I said, guys, I apologize for late night streaming, but again, this is not my day job. If I haven't mentioned before, or if I have, I'll say it again. My primary job is information technology. Right? So I'm an IT guy. I have a small company that I run, but I spend most of my time during the course of the day trying to keep everything above water because as a small businessman with a lot of change we're seeing right now with contracting. So when I get time after I finish my actual work, this is when I spend some time working on getting information together that you see in front of you right now. And then, of course, if I don't stream the very next day, and if it's high on my list to get it done, hey, Fatty will give me a shout out. Hey, John, send me the link. And I go ahead and I do what I'm doing right now. So again, I appreciate you guys for rolling through. Excuse me. So as I said here, let me fill in another gap. So who remembers the movie A Soldier Story? It came out in 1984. That was one of the first movies that Denzel Washington had starred in. So if you don't remember that, the movie, for the most part, I think Harold Rollins was in that now. I believe he's passed on, rest in peace. Harold Rollins was a black officer who was sent down to a black regiment to find the killer of a senior non-commissioned officer. So the big thing about that is that this was going on during World War II, or at least the latter years of World War II. So based upon the construct of the movie here, his job was to go in and interact with black and white soldiers to find the truth. Now, of course, the character who's doing the investigation was a black army captain. He was also part of the legal team, or I guess the legal unit, the legal corps, but he was a lawyer. Now, it was funny watching how folks, being the blacks, were acting to see a black man wearing rank, although he had to remind them, hey, I may be black, but I'm still an officer. but it still did the, as they said then, the colored enlisted proud to see one of their own wearing officer garb. Now, there are a few times where you can see him walk past white enlisted who did not acknowledge him until he had to make his presence known, to whereas then they turn around and acknowledge his presence. So that was also something interesting to see when you look at the military before it was integrated to where it is now. So back in 1948 or so, I believe Harry Truman was president. So at that point in time, this is where Truman has started integrating the armed forces. So remember where I said what Franklin Delano Roosevelt had started the seeds or started planting that by looking at pretty much wanting to intervene and take care of the populace. Well, civil rights, not really a big thing at the moment, but it was still a seed that Roosevelt had planted. Now, you can look at different documents, different articles that will talk about how there was talk of it, but it wasn't really a high priority. But still, the ball was rolling. So by the time Truman got involved, Truman had more or less decided, okay, yes, we are going to, at this point in time, we are going to integrate services. Let's start the desegregation. Now, switch back to our Democratic Party. All right, not our beloved Democratic Party right now, but we're talking about the Democratic Party of racists, of segregationists. They are not thrilled to death at all. Now, at this point in time, you have Strom Thurmond, who is one of the prominent members of the Democratic Party, who happen to be the founding members of inside the Southern Democrats, aka Democrat Party. They formed the Dixiecrat Party. And this party lasted about that long, I think from July of 1947 till November of 47. I think that's when the election was. I have to go back and check, but just understand that the party did not last for long. So understand now that the Dixiecrats were ultra, hell no, we ain't going to go. We are not going to support this. We do not want blacks mixing with the other services. But they had no choice. So Truman started this. And when Eisenhower was elected, he continued on with these policies. So at this point in time is where the first exodus of the Southern Democrats and Dixie Democrats started. So being that there are only two major political parties at the time, Republican and Democrat, where do you think these racist some bitches went to when they left the Democratic Party? They went to the Republican Party. Again, this is all documented. But you can't have that conversation with certain folks. You can't have this conversation with Dennis Sperling. Oh, you damn sure can't have it an Angry Man. I don't know if anyone was on the panel at one particular time, but Angry Man and I got into it about the very topic that we're talking about right now, where he called me an effing liar when I said that the ideologies of the party shifted in the mid 1960s, roughly around 64, 65, with the passing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Angry Man called me a lie, an effing this, and everything he could figure out while he sat there smoking a cigar looking like Paddington Bear at the train station. But still, nonetheless, facts are facts. So again, as I'm filling this in, just understand that the first exodus of the Southern Democrats / Dixie Democrats started in between 1948 going up to 1964 because of the fact that there was more reverence being shown, more attention being shown towards ensuring that blacks were given civil rights and looked at as being equal people. So now, Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, for those of you who don't really know, Lyndon B. Johnson was racist. But still, even as a racist and in the Democratic Party, everybody wants to make sure that they stay in power, right? So what you got to do is go with what's popular. And what was popular was black people. Seriously. We were a popular ticket at one point in time, and everyone who knew what was going down got on board the train. Now, keep in mind now, you also had Martin Luther King Jr. at this time, who was active, who had been doing his rounds talking with Kennedy before his assassination on pushing and getting the Civil Rights Bill up for vote. So where were we? Race, that's it was more. Okay. Um, Race and equality began to return to the center of politics in the 50s and 60s. Race did not necessarily fall into a party viewpoint at this point. Instead, it was more of a regional issue. Southern Democrats and Republicans, we're talking again, people in the South, the Southern Democrats and Southern Republicans both opposed the early civil rights movement, while the Northern Democrats and Northern Republicans began to support legislation as the movement picked up steam. All right, so as I said, depending on where you are, the popularity of the act was, as they said, regional. But overall, it started to go national. And this is where we start seeing the ideologies shifting. It was going into the 60s where you now have this full rolling snowball that's coming downhill that's continually gaining speed, that we're going to see civil rights sitting at the forefront, where blacks, Hispanics, or anybody else who has been marginalized has now got to be recognized as being someone of equal value and of deserving the opportunity, the rights for liberty, or anything else that comes with being an American. In 1964, Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law. In the 1964 election, Republican candidate Barry Goldwater, now he was a Republican, publicly opposed the new law, arguing that it expanded the power of the federal government to a dangerous level. It was this argument that led to a final decisive switch. There's that word again, fellas, switch. Hell, I'll say it again. It was this argument. You know what? Let's even go ahead and highlight it. By the way, shout out here. If you guys know anyone on the other side that we see in the forums here that I don't have access to, go ahead and share this video with them. It was this argument that led to a final decisive switch. Black voters who had historically been loyal to the Republican Party because of the 1866 Civil Rights Acts had already been switching to the Democratic Party. Boom. What else needs to be said, right? And this is information that you can cross-reference either with the documentation that I have right here or others, depending if you go ahead and you look for it. If you look under Dixecrats, Southern Democrats, the type in maybe Republican Party, Democratic Party, ideology switch, something along those lines, it is always going to intersect back to the topics such as this. And again, you can do your cross-referencing from there. All of it lines up. However, upon hearing Goldwater's argument against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the majority of black voters left the Republican Party in favor of the Democrats. They saw the Democratic Party as advocates for equality and justice, while the Republicans were too concerned with keeping the status quo in America. Lovely. You know what? Let me make sure you see that also. I shouldn't enjoy this moment by myself. So once again, here's what I just read. However, upon hearing Goldwater's argument against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the majority of the black voters left the Republican Party in favor of the Democrats. They saw the Democratic Party as advocates for equality and justice, while the Republicans were too concerned with keeping the status quo in America, which was keeping their boot on the neck of blacks. So as I said, again, Dennis was staunchly assured of what he was saying by saying, oh, the parties didn't switch. That's a lie. None of that ever happened. I've given you the facts, folks. There it is right there. Now, if you don't like this article because people say, well, I don't see it being peer reviewed. Okay, you don't have to look at it from that perspective. Okay, I'll give you that if you don't like what you see here. But again, the information that's inside of this, you can cross-reference it someplace else, and it all will tell you the same thing. Now, I think I got something queued up here. Matter of fact, yes, I do. So this should run maybe about 5 minutes. So if I've trapped you guys here long enough, I just want to go ahead also and make sure. Yeah, screw it. I'm going to say, I want to make sure that I rub it in here. All right. So again, this is going back to what we just talked about regarding Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater being the Republican candidate in 1964 who lost to Lyndon B. Johnson. So rather than me talk over this, let me go ahead and put this in here. So if you guys have a little bit of time, it's about a good 5-minute watch, but it's going to go back and circle the bowl on everything that I've just talked about, if not a majority of it. Fair use, fair use.
Barry Goldwater was born in Arizona, a state that didn't join the Union until 1912, so arguably imbued him with a different sense of nationalism than people born in older states. Initially interested in a military career, Goldwater was forced to take over the family business, Goldwater's department store, in the 1940s. In 1949, he entered politics via a seat on the Phoenix City Council before becoming a senator in 1952. He preached modern conservatism that heavily emphasized individualism, protection of private property, anti-communism, and a distrust of centralized power. Goldwater didn't have firm presidential intentions when he published his political creed in a small manifesto, The Conscience of a Conservative, in 1960. The book became a bestseller and a new Bible for conservatives. In it, Goldwater writes civil rights, labor relations, and welfare all require the utmost vigilance and care to keep political power within its proper bounds. He points continually to the Constitution, arguing that it needs to be the rule of the land, not modern decisions by lawmakers, courts, or politicians. He gives an example in discussing Brown v. Board of Education.
Oh, hey, thanks for that, man. I appreciate it. So wow, wasted that, didn't I? I'll just make it real fast here. So basically, what I was saying here, appreciate that. Shit. All right. So basically, what I was saying here is that Barry Goldwater wrote that manifesto in protest of what was happening, and what was happening is that you had the government that he wanted to say was making changes that were almost unconstitutional. And the reason that it was being said because it was working against the politics. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. We still got no sound. Oh, all right. Test, test. All right. Can anybody hear me right now? Put a one in the chat if you can hear me. All right. I think I got some cycles up here on my computer right now. So just a second. Okay, good. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, dude, Jameson, what was the last thing you guys heard here? Go ahead and put it in the chat here. The last thing you heard before we lost your time. All right, good. I see the ones there. We're good here. I think the last thing should have been around Barry Goldwater writing his manifesto. So I apologize here if we're getting a little bit of time out. I'm not sure where that came from. But getting back onto it here. So long story short, Goldwater is in protest of, yeah, I think it's a little bit behind here. So you guys may catch up with me. But again, there was protest here that Goldwater had as far as what was being done, as far as the Civil Rights Act was making changes to ensure that blacks were encompassed inside the rights that whites had. And so again, this was something that was going to be an issue with the Southern Democrats, but you also had elements of the Republican Party who did not want to see this happen as well. But think about this. On the side of the Democrats, where there was an internal fight, whereas no, we don't want to change, we're for segregation, segregation now, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. George Wallace statements down the road, segregation was still something that there were people inside the Democratic Party wanted to see. But again, this is before the final passing of the 65 Voting Rights Act. But again, we're getting another exodus where we have another dump of Democrats, or the Southern Democrats, also Dixie Democrats, who are actively leaving the Democratic Party for the Republican Party. But think about this. There were elements of the Republican Party that did not want to miss the movement of giving blacks rights for the civil rights that they deserve, who actually left the Republican Party and went to the Democratic Party. So you had exodus on both sides. All right, so fair use. Let's get back to it.
In that landmark case from 1954, Goldwater cites Chief Justice Warren as saying, "We cannot turn the clock back to 1868 when the 14th Amendment was adopted. We must consider public education in the light of its full development and its present place in American life through the nation." To that, Goldwater writes, "The court said that what matters is not the ideas of the men who wrote the Constitution, but the court's ideas. The Constitution is what its authors intended it to be and said it was, not what the Supreme Court says it is. If we condone the practice of substituting our own intentions for those of the Constitution's framers, we reject, in effect, the principle of the constitutional government. We endorse a rule of men, not laws." Because of the manifesto, Goldwater became a rallying point, not only for conservatives, but for segregationists and white supremacists as well. Republican voters put off by the New Deal decades earlier were also drawn to this new voice protecting individual freedoms and personal wealth and championing minimal government. In January of 1964, Goldwater announced his intention to run for president. Competition within the party came from moderate Henry Outlaw Jr., who won in the primaries, but Goldwater won the nomination in June, deepening the divide between moderates and conservatives.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
Where you saw the last attempt, all right? The last attempt of the struggle where you see the status quo, which was treating blacks as second-class citizens, starting to pretty much go up in smoke. So this was what they would call, what I believe, what's the expression, guys? The death rattle. So this was the death rattle of the old ideology that was leaving the Democratic Party. That cancer from 1865 to 1965. You saw the last grips of it, where after the 1964 passing of the Civil Rights Act, they were all leaving, they being the Dixecrats, aka segregationists, were leaving for the Republican Party. And those who wanted to see civil rights be pushed and taken forward were leaving the Republican Party and going to the Democratic Party, thereby completing the switch of ideologies. Fair use.
And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
His "don't tread on me" philosophy appealed to voters who felt they had less control over their own lives and businesses than they would have if it hadn't been for FDR and the New Deal. During his presidential campaign, Goldwater voted against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, arguing it infringed on individual freedoms. He ultimately believed it was each.
All right, so you guys heard that, right? He, as a Republican, again, as a Republican, Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Act. Now, again, I didn't hear anything from Dennis, or, even if you have that conversation with Angry Man, if you have it with Candace Owens or Byron Donalds, you don't hear them talking about the Civil Rights Act being voted against by Republicans. You don't hear that. What you hear them say is that, oh, the Democrats voted against the Civil Rights Act. And you know what? They are right. Remember now, until 1965, we still have the old element of the Dixecrats and the Southern Democrats who are controlling the Democratic Party. So anything that is being said about Democrats were voting against the Civil Rights Act, it is true. But it's also true that even though you had Democrats who were voting against it, there was, I believe, a final call of 74 against 27. I think it was 73 or 74 Democrats, 73 for and 27 against. And one of the against was Strom Thurmond and a few other prominent Democrats who actually migrated over to the Republican Party because of the way the Democratic Party was now pro-civil rights. Again, facts. Drop it like it's hot, y'all. Fair use.
Each state's own right to decide on segregation, pointing to the Founding Fathers' vision of America that kept certain civil rights down. On the prospect of Goldwater in the White House, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I feel that the prospect of Senator Goldwater being President of the United States so threatens the health, morality, and survival of our nation that I cannot in good conscience fail to take a stand against what he represents." Goldwater's team did something else crucial during that campaign. They had actor turned public speaker Ronald Reagan, the great communicator known for his gift of oration, film a speech.
The full power of centralized government. This was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those Founding Fathers, that outside of its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy.
The speech, as Reagan called it, or more properly, A Time for Choosing, was a hit, and donations to the Republican Party skyrocketed after it.
All right, so now is a good point that I need to make mention of Martin Luther King. Now, you saw where Martin Luther King said he saw that Goldwater was such a threat to the livelihood of blacks that he himself could not push anyone to vote Republican. Martin Luther King had then begun convincing blacks who had traditionally voted for Republicans, because remember now, the Republican Party, as it used to be, was for blacks. It was, again, for civil rights, to see blacks be elevated in society and have equal rights of others. Blacks, as a result, had always voted Republican because of that. That is the main reason right now why you still have Republicans saying right now that we are the party of Lincoln. Why would you ever vote for Democrats? Because the Democrats only want to see the worst happen for you. They are racists. Remember when I said before that Dennis Sperling was tying the old ideology of the Democratic Party from 1860, 65, 75, 95, from then direct to 2025? Well, here's the contradiction that they don't think about. How are you going to say that the Democratic Party is still the same, but yet not realize that the Republican Party that you are is not? It's a toss-up. But Blacks used to vote Republican because of the ideology that the Republicans were for blacks. But Barry Goldwater's statement, as Martin Luther King said, was so detrimental that he had no choice but to make sure that blacks voted for the Democratic Party, who are now showing to be pro civil rights. The ideology swap around between two parties. So the racists, the segregationists, who were part of the Democratic Party, who had controlled the majority of the South, who was responsible for the laws that were hindering blacks, when they saw the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, they left and went to the Republican Party, who you see was now stating that we do not want to see civil rights passed because it changed the structure of the country and what the founding fathers intended. Okay, that was a racist view because remember now, when everything was written as far as the Constitution, blacks were not considered, which again shows that you still had folks who were not ready, willing, able, and refused. Racists left the Democratic Party, went to the Republican Party. Republicans who wanted to see civil rights passed and a change in country and government left the Republican Party and went to the Democratic Party. Shift complete. We shouldn't even have to bury that hatch anymore, right? But before we do, recall that I made the statement that Dennis Sperling said that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. Now, you recall that, right? But before we go any further, I do feel the need to share this. All right, so here's an old article here. This is right about the time when Donald Trump was beginning to run for office, and you started having people making the claim because you know when it always gets close to Martin Luther King's birthday, both parties want to try and find a way to make sure that Martin Luther King is mentioned. So here we see Martin Luther King was a Republican and other myths. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican. He opposed affirmative action. He grew so radical near the end of his life that he considered renouncing nonviolence. Which of those statements are true? None of them. They're all bogus. But that won't stop them from circulating among some Americans as Martin Luther King Day approaches. Again, this was an article that was done back on 18 January 2016. So if you go to what's the title of this article? If you go ahead and type in MLK was a Republican and other myths, you can take a look and see some of the tales that used to be told, and matter of fact, that are still told right now. Myth number one, he grew more radical in his last years. Myth number two, he was a Republican. No, he was not. Matter of fact, Martin Luther King went as far to say that he did not associate with either Republican or Democrat. He even went as far as stating that he felt that there was a failure amongst both parties to address the needs of black people. More so he saw when I believe George Wallace was running for president, or actually I think that may have been after he was assassinated. But nonetheless, he saw a trend even amongst the Democratic Party that there were still elements of folks who did not want to see the advancement of black people. But again, he was not a Republican. And of course, there's a few more myths here. Since we're here, let's go ahead and do it. King opposed affirmative action. Okay, we know that is not true. He believed in equality for all. Now, this may strike a few folks if they didn't know this, but Martin Luther King was sexist. Now, that is something that will blow a few folks' minds here when they hear this. Now, if this is new news to some folks, hey, I apologize if this is striking you because you didn't know it. Well, there you go. So if you want, you can also do a search on Ella Baker. And I believe there's other statements that she has as far as interactions with King during the course of the civil rights movement. All right. But the biggest thing that I wanted to show here, just to counter another statement that was made by Dennis Sperling, is that Martin Luther King was a Republican. No, he was not. Again, he made sure that he distanced himself from any type of affiliation with either party because he wanted to make sure that he was neutral. And just to show here that I am big about my cross-referencing, all right, from Britannica, here was another article speaking, oh my goodness, pop-ups. All right, here's another article speaking to the fact of, was Martin Luther King Jr. a Republican or Democrat? The official answer is neither. Now, again, yes, I agree, Dirty Dude. We are all flawed. So it's possible that two things can be right or be factual at the same time. But what people tend to look more at, which was needed at that particular time, was realizing that civil rights was an issue and something that needs to be addressed, and therefore was, and Martin Luther King was at the forefront up until the time of his death. But again, going back to what I was saying here, Martin Luther King was neither Republican or Democrat. He was neither. So we just want to put a pin in that. There is no truth of him being a registered Republican, although because of the fact that, again, think about this, prior to 1965, blacks voted Republican because of Lincoln freeing the slaves. As a result, that's where the unity and the loyalty was. So it was only right for people to assume that Martin Luther King was a Republican because of the environment. I believe his father was Republican. He had a brother. His brother was Republican. So yes, why would he not be a Republican? I've even seen articles that said that, oh, he was a registered Republican and he registered in 1956. But there was nothing that I could find, not saying it exists, but if it does, I haven't seen it. But overall, from the documentation that I've seen, there is nothing at all stating that Martin Luther King was ever a registered Republican. Now, again, you saw where he did guide folks towards the Democratic nomination because of Barry Goldwater's stance on racism, or should I say, on wanting to maintain the status quo. All right, so let's get back to it. Fair use, fair use.
Aired on October 27, 1964. But it wasn't enough. Goldwater lost the election. But the campaign did bring some victories, though they weren't immediately obvious. It sparked new trends for the movement conservatives that emphasized championing small government and individual freedoms. And they started eyeing Ronald Reagan as their next candidate, but he would have to wait. In 1969, Richard Nixon, Eisenhower's former vice president, brought the Republicans back into the White House. Nixon's presidency coincided with a significant dip in Americans' faith in government. The war in Vietnam was worsening. The Cold War was at a point of détente, slightly, but it wasn't going anywhere. And
all right, so at this point in time, this is where you can see where we're now getting into, we're going towards the modern times where the switch has been complete. As of right now, the Democratic Party is now the party of the common folks, of the workers, you name it. Everything that the Republican Party was is no longer. It is now accepted that the Democratic Party is now the party of the people. So, how do you argue with that? you, you can't, right? But still, people do. Doesn't matter how you say it, there are still folks who will take the information that I'm sharing right now and will not believe it, regardless of the facts that are presented. So, just a second here. Let me pull up something else. All right, stand by. All right, I believe I've hit just about all the points I was looking for here. One of the last few things I want to do here, I just want to make mention here. Again, if you guys are able to take a look at the timeline that I provide inside the description, there's one or two more things I think I'll go ahead and mention. But something I have not mentioned right about now, find someone, tell somebody who knows somebody about what's going on right about now. If you like this, hey, by all means, share it. I appreciate that. And if you can, make sure that anybody else out there who wants to know about this knows about it, because this is something that we're going to do for now until we find out that I cannot do it. So I will always keep making time for it, right? So I got to make sure that you do that. Find somebody who knows somebody, tell somebody about what's going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do, and subscribe. This is what you're looking for. All right. So again, let's look at, see, 203. I think we talked about that. There we go. So at one point in time, Dennis also talked about George Washington's farewell address. And in the address, Washington talked about making sure that we didn't form political factions or form relationships. And pretty much, if you remember James Madison, who was the fourth president, remember Madison had a statement that was America for the Americans. So as a result, George Washington, at his point in time, we had just finished fighting the United Kingdom. There was no way that he could have fathomed that the UK would be a solid partner for us in modern history. So therefore, when you look at George Washington's farewell address, everything he said coincided with what was going on then, the current landscape of the time. America had just fought for its freedom. So as a result, staying out of foreign alliances was something that he said America shouldn't do. If you had one, make sure it was brief. But of course, we know that the UK has been our partners. Now, as of this current date, as of 20 January 2025, we are on shaky ground with our partners, as everybody knows. But again, from the time that Washington knew when he was leaving his farewell address, he didn't know that what was going to happen, which is the UK would become our partners and we would fight wars with them, would come to pass. But again, Dennis Sperling misrepresented that, and eyed the Democratic Party as being, again, a detriment to foreign relations. Once again, linking 1865, 1895, 1920, whatever, directly to 2025. No truth in it. Yeah, Carl, I see your statement here. We all gravitated towards the Democratic Party for a reason. Yeah, we did. We saw that the benefits that were coming from having voted Republican as blacks, because obviously I wasn't around in 1965, I was born in 1970, but we saw the benefits of voting Republican were now going to be upheld by the Democratic Party, which makes sense. Go and vote your interest, right? And that's what blacks did. Now, funny enough, still, you cannot get blacks who are still voting Republican to accept that. But there's so much misinformation out here, then yes, you will see how easy it is for folks to believe that the Republican Party is still the Republican Party of old. It is not. We see this. Other folks outside of us can see this, but there are some folks who do not. But these facts that I'm trying to present here may not do anything for anyone. Now, if it does, it's only because you guys and myself, we take the time to show folks and try to educate them. Try and do what we can. We try and bring everyone along. Each one teach one, right? All right, there's also an issue where Sperling made the statement about Maxine Waters. Oh, here we go. At 1 hour, 34 minutes and 42 seconds. Dennis accuses Maxine Waters of aggressive speech, but yet he conveniently forgets about Donald Trump's speech that ignited an insurrection. Yeah, he actually brought up Maxine Waters, talking about, oh, she's just speaking all nasty and hard. Look at this. This is the Democratic Party. Look at how they talk. Look at how they carry themselves. But again, conveniently overlooked the fact that Donald Trump fomented an insurrection. Now, he also had a run at Jasmine Crockett, forgive me. Now, I will say that she's got a bit of a potty mouth in her. Don't get me wrong. Her heart's in the right place, but I've seen some actions from her like, girl, you can tone it down just a little bit. But nonetheless, again, he's making statements. She's a whole lawyer out here. Look at how she's behaving. But yet, Donald Trump is a whole president up here calling people son of a bitch. You know, get this guy out of here, get this jackass. When's the last time you ever heard a president curse? I had never heard a president curse in front of a crowd until Donald Trump's era came along. Again, Dennis took time to speak of everybody else, the hypocrisy, but failed to mention that his president conducted himself in the same manner. Hey, folks, like I said, all I can do is provide you the information that I see through observable reality. Facts do not choose sides. All right, so I'm not going to do that. But what does choose sides will be the person who is reading the facts or adding their interpretation to them. All right, folks, I think I have done enough damage here. There's not much I can think of that I've missed. So again, by all means, if there's any information that you'd like to see that I did not talk about on screen, because we're at what, an hour and 36? Hey, there's more to be seen in the description. And also, I want you guys to realize if there's something that you would like me to discuss, by all means, drop me an email, hit me on my community page, let me know, and I'll take a look at that. So the information that I share here is for everyone. If there's no one that you know of right now that could benefit from this that's here with us, by all means, share it. Let's get it going here. What I would like to do is hit 100 subscribers by at least the middle of summer. So let's say by the end of July. Now I'm at 77 right now, so I'm sure we can get there before then, but let's go ahead and try and keep this going. The hopes here is that by the end of the year, I can get myself monetized and we look at doing a few other things here, right? Also keep in mind that I'm doing more work together with Fatty here as possible. And you may see me on some panels, either sitting there as one of the folks participating, or just recently, you might see me as a moderator. Now, just the other day, matter of fact, yesterday, Fatty had his week, what is that, the Wednesday Raising the Cage, and I participated as a moderator. And if any of you happen to see that, we had a lot of misinformation that was flowing around. There were statements being made to the point, if you didn't catch it, where I think, matter of fact, Jake, myself and Sean Antonio debated Jake and CJ a few weeks ago. And it was against Sean Antonio, myself against Jake and CJ. Well, yesterday it was just Fatty against CJ, as you were, Fatty against Jake. And as expected, the misinformation was off the rails again from Jake. And as a result, I had to spend a lot of my time fact checking a lot of his statements. So, for example, Canada, as Jake has said, their defense was being paid for by America. That was not true. He also stated that the funding, I guess, for medical, I believe so, was also being paid for by America. That was not true. There are multiple statements that I caught that were not true. And even though both him and Fatty did a good job as far as information, showmanship that a lot of people came for was there, I made a statement at the very beginning. I was not there to grade the showmanship. I was there to grade the facts. So even though it was a deadlock between the two based upon the information presented, countering back and forth, I did put my vote for Fatty because of the fact that Jake spoke a lot of mistruth. Again, I'm there for the fact, not the show. So if you see me in any panels in the future, understand that I'm in the background checking. So I will always make sure that there's going to be some element of truth that could be attributed to what's being said. So let's keep that in mind. And I'll say it for the final time, facts do not choose sides. All right, folks, that's pretty much it, man. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. So for final time, find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what's going on. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe. This is what you're looking for. As always, guys, I appreciate you stopping in and having this conversation with me. Let's keep this going, all right? Thanks again. Other than that, John Henry out.